My former boss told me one time that I was really good at complaining. And I want to show you something that I'm just now encountering for the first time, which is an example of why it is sometimes beneficial to be a squeaky wheel and a dedicated one, because check this out. If you have been following my account and work, you might recall that this ugly construction fence is actually protecting one of the rarest types of plants that grows natively to our city, which is the Baccharis vanessae. And this is actually this small remnant of the type locality of that species. And this fence is new. And I'm excited about this because, let me think for a moment. I believe that it was 6 years ago that I walked through this very trail with elected officials and city staff, and we had the first conversations about what a blessing it would be to the plants in this space should they gain even a little bit of protection that the plants on this side of the trail, or pathway to be more accurate, have had for many, many years. And part of why I highlighted this kind of need in the first place is because this side, the north side, which was the previously unprotected side, the side with the new fence, that's where most of the rare plants are. And they were getting hammered in the first place by people who don't have homes and opted to use, admittedly, our amazing environment here in Encinitas for outdoor living, encampments basically. And it's rare that people in such situations have the ability or the capacity or the interest or whatever it may be to be sensitive to rare plant species that almost nobody's even aware of in the first place. Following up those issues, because there's been a whole flare-up of kind of public outrage, outcry, however you want to characterize it. There's a lot of vociferousness in Encinitas currently about perceived increases in homelessness. I think that in some cases it's actually just that it's a little bit more front and center, because I've been actually monitoring and mapping these issues in the open spaces of Encinitas for years. And it's not true that, for example, there's growth in encampments in places like the restored slope behind Cottonwood Creek Park, for example. But there are people just on the lawn in the park. I don't know that it's better, worse, or any of that. But the point being that the sheriff's deputies in our community have been put to a lot of pressure to kind of like rouse the homeless, get them out of here, the undesirables. We don't want to see them particularly. When they were in the wilds, it really was bothering people like me. When they're downtown, it starts to become more of a matter of public outcry in a politically indicting way. So, long story shorter, I guess, the contracted landscape management staff who work for Excel Landscaping and are hired under contract by the park staff within the city of Encinitas, because our city does not have enough staff to manage all of our city resources. So the contracted landscapers, per requests from those sheriff's deputies, were actually pruning this living native ecology, and then doing something that was referenced as vertical mulching. And I gave people a lot of hell about this because you're double dipping on the damage. You're cutting sensitive native plants without any need for that to be done. And then you are arbitrarily just piling those into spaces in an effort to physically exclude human beings. But you're also smothering, trampling, compacting, all of these things, those same exact spaces, and making them not suitable for the native flora and fauna to do their work, their livelihoods. So, this is a long, rambly tangent about a fence. And that if you speak up and you're persistent and you are tactful in the way that you egg people on, put some edge on a little bit of this and that, but don't alienate people. Evidently, some things can happen. It's cool. It might take 6 years, but that is a huge improvement. I'm here for 2 reasons, and neither of them are the fence. This tree, arguably not native to this exact spot, if you want to be super split hairy, Pinus torreana, one of the rarest conifers in the country, and there has been this crazy long-running argument in San Diego County about what is afflicting these trees. And some of it is very evident. Drought, yes. Bark beetles exacerbated by that drought, yes. But there's weird symptomatic patterns that have always looked diseasey. And yet, nobody for a really long time was able to kind of nail down what exactly is actually going on. There's actually been crazy San Diego County constituents who are so adamant about this that they are insistent that these Torrey pines are declining because of chemtrails. That was the word on the street. And nobody else had like a scientifically backed counter argument, except for that seems too ludicrous to really even entertain. I started noticing some issues in Encinitas as far back now as 2017, I think. And I kind of have a knack for understanding the patterns behind what I'm seeing evidenced in a landscape. And I had a strong suspicion that what we were watching were this sort of population boom of the Ips beetles, mostly Ips paraconfusus, the 5-spined engraving beetle, if I remember correctly. I'm not an entomologist. Moving through areas like the Torrey Pines Reserve, and it seemed as though we were watching a population boom at that point in time. And then all of a sudden trees start to show really weird signs in their canopies and strange patterns of dieback that are associated with evidence of these bark beetles, but have never seemed to actually be caused by those bark beetles in terms of mechanical damage to cambium or these kinds of things. Part of what prompted me to get on this track of university study that I'm pursuing was these trees. Actually, the one that was here. See that stump? And 2 years ago, I believe, somewhere in there now. Time kind of flies and all of these dates get mashed up in my brain. But while I was working with the city as an employee of DUDAC, I took samples here, and one of the complicated things about pinning down a pathogen in the field is that often people are looking at kind of the echoes of whatever kind of organism it is in question. And you have to get where it is, not where it was. There's so many saprophytes and other kind of opportunistic post-infection organisms that just confuse everything. And so you need to be getting the symptomatic kind of edge where tissue is not dead, but it is not uninfected. And so with the tree that was here, I took some samples into the lab, and it turns out concretely, for the first time I think in this area at all, that we are sure that these trees are being attacked or they're infected sporadically. This is an interesting fungus because it doesn't actually systematically move through the trees. Little bits and pieces will die, and in some cases that ends up leading to tree mortality. That was the truth for this one. But there's just open public spaces. I thought issues were reduced related to unauthorized access to this space by this glorious fence, but I can hear that there's only so much effective mitigation afforded by some braided cable. Anyway, I found Fusarium circinatum in these trees, and I don't love that that's true, but at least we are sure what is actually happening. So this whole kind of story arc of bark beetles exacerbated by drought and this kind of boom that we've seen at the state reserve itself, vectoring Fusarium circinatum, a disease that kills that growing tip. Wherever those beetles get in, if they're carrying that fungus, that tip then dies back. And this is what's happening in sections like here. And I came up with a whole mitigation strategy for the city, but then I moved on, and a lot of times when I am no longer involved with a project, there's not a lot of reason to assume that it will continue with the type of momentum that I was once driving it with. I guess that's one of the things that I'm good at. Oh, I'm on the other side of the fence. I want to mention that I have been afforded a right of entry agreement thanks to our wonderful city staff. And so, as I think I've mentioned in previous videos, do not do this unless you legally allowed to do so. And in this particular case, I've even offered our city all of my commercial liability insurance information and those types of things. So, last time I was here, little tiny baby, super rare Encinitas baccharis plants, and they were starting to get subsumed by recently introduced noxious weeds. And I showcased that a little bit, and I mentioned at that time that my friends at the San Diego Botanic Garden are the ones now in charge of managing this stuff here through a contract with the city. And kudos, Joe DeWolf in particular, being the person at that garden who's running this habitat management and restoration program, whatever they're referring to, he's calling his own work these days. This is awesome. I'm stoked to see this. I'm gonna get out of my own frame. This is so cool. Check it out. It's just a bunch of little green clumps. I get it. But none of those were there prior to some wonderful rains that prompted a whole huge flush, a rare one, of these plants that at one point I had counted as few of them as 26 remaining in this population. It's grown in a lot. Things are looking healthy, and the flags that I put in the first place are still here. Hey Joe, you can take these flags out. But a lot of those plants are still there too, and they're slow in habitat, evidently, because when I grow these from seed in a nursery type of a setting, I can get them to flower within one full growth season. And these look to me like it's going to take maybe 2 to 3 years for them to actually get to the stage of maturity. Hopefully they don't get drought plagued too bad, but as it stands, the city has totally stepped up to actually accomplish something that I had basically given up on. And Joe and presumably volunteers and probably some other staff from the San Diego Botanic Garden have totally rescued this, what was on the edge of extirpation, population of a plant that's named after our city. So, tree diseases, it's my world, it's my work, but I love some of what I'm seeing